My mother-in-law called me the girl with no future at my own wedding. She had no idea I already owned the building her son's company operated out of. The first time I met my mother-in-law, Diane, she looked me up and down in the doorway of her home, and before I could even say hello properly, she turned to my fiancé, Ethan, and said, in a voice she clearly didn't think I could hear, "Well, she's pretty, but what does she actually do?" I told her, calmly, that I worked in commercial real estate investment. She smiled the kind of smile people give when they've already decided you're lying, or at the very least, exaggerating. "That's nice, dear," she said. "Real estate is a lovely little hobby for young women these days." A hobby. 11 years of work, 3 states of licensing, and a portfolio I had built from nothing after growing up with parents who could barely afford our rent, reduced to a hobby, in one sentence, at a dinner where I hadn't even finished. It didn't stop there. Over the 2 years Ethan and I dated, Diane found new ways, almost weekly, to remind me that I wasn't quite good enough for her son. She'd mention, unprompted, how Ethan's ex-girlfriend came from old money. She'd ask me, in front of guests, if I was still doing the real estate thing. She once suggested, at a family barbecue, that I should consider a more stable path, maybe something in administration, since not everyone is built for building businesses. I let it go. Every time. Not because I was weak, but because I understood something Diane never bothered to learn about me. I don't argue with people who underestimate me. I let them keep underestimating me, because it's the only advantage that costs nothing and pays enormous return. At our wedding, Diane gave a toast. She meant it to be sweet, I think, in her own way. But halfway through, in front of 200 guests, she said, when Ethan told us he was marrying a girl with no real career and no real future, I'll admit, we were worried. But love finds a way, doesn't it? The room went quiet in that specific, uncomfortable way rooms go quiet when everyone heard something they wish they hadn't. Ethan's face went red. My mother's hand tightened around her wine glass. I just smiled, raised my glass along with everyone else, and said nothing, because at that exact moment, I was 6 weeks away from closing on a commercial property downtown, a 5-story office building that, as it happened, already housed. I hadn't planned it that way. It was coincidence, purely a matter of the deal being the best opportunity available in that market at that time. I didn't even mention it to Ethan until after the papers were signed, mostly because our relationship had never been about money, and I didn't want it to start being about money now. But 3 months into our marriage, when Ethan came home stressed about a rent increase notice his company had just received from the building's new ownership group, I finally told him the truth. The new ownership group was me. He laughed for almost a full minute before he realized I wasn't joking. I want to be clear about something. I didn't buy that building to prove a point to his mother. I bought it because it was a smart investment with strong tenant retention and a location that was about to appreciate significantly due to a transit expansion 2 blocks away. The fact that it happened to house Diane's son's company was simply the universe having a sense of humor I hadn't asked for. But once I knew, I made one decision, and I stand by it completely. I didn't raise the rent on Holbrook and Associates. In fact, I quietly extended their lease terms and locked in a better rate than they'd had before, through the property management company, without revealing who was behind the decision. Ethan's company thrived. His team got a stability they hadn't expected. And I never said a single word about it to Diane. The truth came out entirely by accident, almost a year later, at a family dinner, when Ethan's father made an offhand comment about how lucky Holbrook had been with their new landlord, practically handing them a gift with the lease terms. Diane, without missing a beat, said she'd love to meet whoever ran that property management company, because clearly they had excellent business sense, unlike some people's little hobbies. Ethan looked at me. I looked at him. And for the first time in almost 3 years, I decided it was time to stop letting her underestimate me for free. I told her, as calmly as I'd told her about my career the very first day we met, that she already knew the person who ran that property. She'd met her at a wedding, actually. Gave a toast about her, in fact. Diane's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She asked me to repeat what I'd just said, certain she'd misheard. I hadn't misheard anything, and neither had she. I explained, simply and without any anger in my voice, that the hobby she'd mocked for years had grown into a portfolio worth more than she likely imagined, and that her son's company had been operating, rent-stabilized and protected, inside a building I had personally acquired and managed for the past year. She didn't apologize that night. People like Diane rarely do, not right away. But something shifted. The comments stopped. The hobby jokes disappeared entirely from her vocabulary. And 6 months later, at a dinner I wasn't even sure she'd attend, she asked me, quietly, almost like it cost her something to say it, if I might be willing to. Ethan and I still laugh about it sometimes, usually late at night, when we're going over paperwork for whatever new property has caught my attention. He says his mother still tells people, proudly now, that her daughter-in-law is quite the businesswoman. She's never once mentioned the word hobby again. I don't need her approval, and I never did. But I'll admit, there's a certain quiet satisfaction in being underestimated by someone who now signs her retirement plans over to the very hobby she once dismissed at my own wedding. If you've ever been the person everyone assumed wouldn't amount to much, the daughter-in-law, the sibling, the co-worker nobody took seriously, remember this, you don't owe anyone the satisfaction of watching you prove them wrong out loud. Sometimes the loudest revenge is simply becoming so undeniably capable that the people who doubted you have no choice but to come to you, quietly, asking for help. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Silent Empire. New story every week, subscribe so you never miss one. See you in the next one.